intended to provide feedback to the agency on rules that we are working on, draft rules. So Isaac and Renee will be taking the lead on that. When you're providing feedback, I encourage you to think about kind of 3 questions. What do you like about the rules? You know, if there's something you like about it, maybe go ahead and share that. I think as humans, we have a easier time sharing what we don't care for versus what we do. We want to know what works well for you. And when you have something that you don't like, let us know how we can improve it, or if there's additional information that we need to know to help understand why that piece doesn't work. I ask that everybody put themselves on mute. And when you have something to say, you can either raise your little virtual hand. They're across the top in Teams, not at the bottom like Zoom. Or if you come off mute, we'll know that you have something to say. And either myself, Isaac, or Renee will call on you. With that, I'm going to go through the list of RAC participants just to see who's here. And then I will turn it over to Isaac and Renee to get started. So first, Greg Harris.
I am here.
Perfect. Jeff, and I'm going to butcher your last name, Svedden.
Yep, I'm here.
Perfect. Ascension Ibarra. Okay. Eric Oram.
Yes, I'm here.
Good morning. Carlos Bonilla.
Yes, good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Bob Waldher. Okay. Tamara Mabbitt is unavailable today. Tom Strawn.
Here.
Good morning. Karen Lewatsky. Don't see Karen. Justin Green.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I do see Karen. Karen, you just joined us. Going through the list of folks.
I did indeed just join you. I seem to be having trouble getting places on time lately. I apologize.
No worries. I feel the same way. Jose Garcia.
I'm here.
Okay. Karen, if you could mute yourself. Cheyenne Holiday.
I'm here.
Good morning. Caleb. Are you?
More, buddy. Yeah, I am here.
Awesome. Paul Oyster.
Hi, Sunny. Good morning.
Good morning, Paul. Brad Spencer.
I am here.
Oof, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Danny Lytle.
I'm here.
Good morning. Mike Hyatt.
I'm here.
Good morning. Treya Nance.
Here.
Chris Kowitz.
I'm here. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And then we have Isaac Stapleton with ODA, Kevin Fenn. I think I saw you, Kevin. There you are. And Renee Moulin. Just as a reminder, these are public meetings. However, comments are limited to RAC members, those folks that I just called. Forgot the word. Anyway, the list of folks I just called on. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Isaac and Renee.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sunny, for being our guide and our facilitator today. So today we actually get into the fun part of the RAC, right? Last time we kind of set things up, laid some ground rules about how we were thinking about going through this process over the next several months. Today we're going to go over several of the sections in more detail and get some direct feedback on language. So we'll go over the purpose and authority section, the geographic and programmatic scope section, walk through some definitions, the prohibited acts, land application rates and restrictions, and then the animal pasturing section. If we don't get through all of these sections, we'll just carry one over to the next meeting. That's totally fine. So if we're really, engaged on a particular section or set of language, that's okay. We have time to discuss these and get them right. So don't feel like we have to rush through to get through this whole agenda today. It's more about having a thoughtful discussion around the language and what it means and what works and what doesn't. Kind of like Sunny pointed out, like what do we like, what doesn't work, where do we need maybe some different information that we should consider. So we'll go through each of those. Renee will share her screen and we'll go through the language, kind of section by section, and kind of take them as they come. Any questions from the group before we get started? And I'll try and keep track of the chat too.
I got you covered. I just dropped the agenda in and then Jose may have to go on and off screen.
Okay, great. And then if you can, state your name, like who you are for those folks that maybe like can't see everybody on the screen. I know like you guys all don't fit on my screen. So if you pop up and you're talking to me, it's just like, hey, this is Isaac with ODA. I want to talk about, section, whatever. That'll just help everybody track kind of where comments are coming from as we go through. Okay. With that, Renee, do you want to share your screen and we'll jump right in?
Sure. Good morning, everyone.
Oh, I guess while Renee's pulling that up, the other thing I was going to mention too. So as we get comments and feedback today, after this meeting, we'll go back internally and kind of review those and look at those for incorporation and how we may make some edits. At the next meeting, our first agenda item will be to talk about what we talked about last time and any changes that we made to the draft as we go through. So we're kind of keeping a running discussion and tally as we move through. So we may not land on specific changes today. That's great. Like we want that feedback. We'll think about how we can incorporate that, and then we'll follow up with the group at the next meeting.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I have up on the screen the draft of the rules that was released to you before the RAC started. And then I wanted to call your attention to the fact that I actually did a few little edits on the 21st. And I just put those in red lines so that you can see exactly what has changed. And then I'd be happy to talk through with you why we made some of the changes. But first off, can everyone see the rules that I have pulled up on screen share? If you can't, speak up, please. Okay.
They look good, Renee.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then if you have questions, I may not be able to see your hand. So Isaac, if you could, Isaac or Sunny or Kevin, if you could help me when someone has a question I don't notice. But the first section of the rules is purpose and authority. And this is just kind of standard way to frame up rules. Subsection 1 refers to the lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area, and it describes it briefly. And also I refer to an Appendix A, which will be a map of the groundwater management area as provided in the draft. It's the Oregon Nitrate Reduction Plan for the lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area. And I don't know if you're familiar with that document, but we did provide a link to it in that list of references. And if you want, I can pull up what that map looks like. Do folks want me to do that, or are we all pretty familiar with where that area is in the Umatilla Basin? What do you think, Isaac? Shall we try to?
I think the group is familiar, but if anybody does want us to pull up a map, just to be clear, please raise your hand and we're happy to do that. Yeah,
So
let's keep
everyone's
going.
good?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality has designated the area as a groundwater management area because of high levels of nitrate in water wells used for human consumption. High levels of nitrate in drinking water can cause serious health effects and is particularly dangerous for infants and pregnant persons. So we just set that up so that we have a context for why the rules are being written. Subsection 2 says, understanding that agriculture within the LUBGWMA provides valuable food and fiber products to communities worldwide. These rules are intended to prevent the discharge of nitrates into groundwater from agricultural activities while maintaining the economic viability of agriculture within the LUBGWMA. These area rules implement the Umatilla and Willow Creek Water Quality Management Area plans, as those plans address nitrate pollution in groundwater within the LUBGWMA and contain actions necessary to minimize nitrate leaching to groundwater. So I see a couple of
Renee.
hands.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's go with Tom, and then we'll go to Justin.
Yeah, the after Umatilla and Willow Creek, you should have the word agricultural water quality management area.
Thank you. That noted. Thank you for that catch.
Well, I helped write 7 of those things, so.
It sure helps to have another pair of eyes.
Justin?
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Are we sure that all of the wells that have shown high concentrations of nitrates are drinking water wells? It's my understanding that there's monitoring wells that are just monitoring wells that aren't drinking water wells, and so just want to clarify that, and we probably want to be sure to be accurate in our description there in paragraph 1.
Paragraph 1. Oh, so the reason that we refer to drinking water wells is because the groundwater management area is intended to address the nitrate problem specifically in drinking water wells, because that's where the public health issues arise, is when people are using small domestic wells and drinking high concentrations of nitrate in particular. So that's why it's written that way. Does that help, Justin?
A little bit. I mean, I don't feel. I mean, that is one of the major purposes of a groundwater management area, but I'm not sure if that's the sole purpose. I'm not sure how substantive, that is regardless, but, if we're going into that level of detail, I think it is good to be precise, but I will just make a note of that and do some research on my own.
That would be helpful if you could share that with us. I would like to understand better the context of your concern and how you think that might be better.
So Justin, are you just essentially asking if we would call out all the monitoring wells, and that information is being used to make the decision on the GWMA, whether they're a drinking water well or they're a monitoring well network that's not used for drinking water? Is that kind of what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that it's a GWMA because of high concentrations in wells that are part of a monitoring network, not necessarily because they are wells being used for drinking water consumption.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is just kind of more my unfortunate lawyer thinking of just wanting to be precise, because you never know what the future beholds, and just being precise, I think, is important.
Yeah. Okay. Or possibly broadening the language to kind of just be a bigger scope and overview of groundwater contamination and the data used to determine that, or something like that.
Well, I mean, I think I would use the definition in the Groundwater Protection Act of, what triggers a groundwater management area, and that is high concentrations in monitoring wells, not high concentrations in drinking water wells.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks.
I was going to jump in real quick, Isaac. I just maybe wording there could just say high levels of nitrate in groundwater, just to simplify it.
I would support what Justin said. This is Karen Lowatsky. Also, for better or for worse, a law school graduate. I would encourage us to actually use whatever the language is in the groundwater management protection declaration that makes it a groundwater management area, because I agree with Justin. They're not basing that designation on drinking water wells. They're basing it on monitoring wells generally. And I think that we should make sure this aligns in language with what DEQ actually said for this particular general introduction to the piece. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks,
Caleb.
Yeah, sort of in between what everyone's saying here. I agree that it might be worth broadening this out a little bit. I kind of like what Kevin was saying about just saying groundwater generally. I know the LUBGWMA was established based on testing in the monitoring well network, but I mean the purpose obviously is for human health, not necessarily just for the sake of monitoring it, right? And just thinking about like the language now in SB 1154, it sort of broadens things out as well to say based on any review of any relevant data, a groundwater management area may be established. So I would lean toward broadening this out, maybe just saying wells generally, clarifying for the purpose of human health protection, so something like that.
Perhaps just checking with DEQ and asking them what they would advise in this situation would be helpful. Interagency cooperation and all that.
Sorry, Karen, I didn't fully get your comment. Did you say ask DEQ what they would suggest?
Yeah,
That was
ask them what they would suggest. Sister agency and all that.
Okay. Subsection 3 refers to some of the legal authorities for these rules. And I just wanted to point out that there was a typo referring to 265, 561, 265. It should be referring to 561, 275 through 290. Shall I move on? Okay, the second section, O2, refers to the geographic and programmatic scope of the rules. Subsection 1 says operational boundaries for the agricultural land subject to these area rules are provided in Appendix A. Same map I was just referring to, and include all lands within the LUBGWMA in agricultural use. 2, these area rules do not apply to public lands managed by federal agencies, lands that make up the reservation of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and land or activities subject to Oregon's Forest Practices Act. Subsection 3, all landowners conducting agricultural activities on lands in agricultural use within the LUBGWMA shall comply with these area rules as they are applicable to the size and type of agricultural operation. Subsection 4, these area rules do not authorize violation of any federal, state, or local law or regulation. Subsection 5, yes. Question from Greg Harris.
Yeah, just real quick on the federal land piece, is that a law or a rule, or, and the reason I asked, I'm thinking about the Army depot where there is a plume, a nitrate plume, west of Hermiston, and there is potential for some agricultural activities to happen out there. So how would this rule apply?
Well, I think that this rule was written to based on previous DOJ advice that cautions against writing state rules as they apply to federal lands, because often federal lands are governed by federal law, and their authority is derived from the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, and it kind of trumps other inconsistent laws. And so there may be situations where there is no conflict, so there is no preemption. And that's, maybe that's the situation that you're referring to with the plume. We'd have to ask DOJ to look into that more carefully. But as a general matter, states don't try to regulate federal lands, just as they don't try to regulate lands that are within the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Karen
Right, and-
Lotsky.
Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
Greg, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Well, I guess to tag onto that. So if there is activity on the bombing range, so in an area that hasn't been turned over to the port or state management, and there is still a large chunk of ground out there that's designated for military. So if agriculture activity goes on in that area, then they will not be bound to these rules, is what.
No, that's not what I
I'm hearing.
said. What I'm saying is that there would have to be an analysis as to whether there was any preemption of federal laws for the inconsistent state laws.
And Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but currently any agricultural activity that is done on federal land in the state under the current water quality rules, we don't have jurisdiction over those federal lands. So,
Correct.
so whether that's specific to the LUB or if we're talking about Klamath Falls or any other area of the state, our state rules around ag water quality only exist to private lands, but not federally held lands or tribal lands. So this also wouldn't extend into federal or tribal lands.
Yeah, it can be both private and state-owned land. So there are times when state-owned
Yeah.
lands can be leased to landowners, but for federal lands, we do not have jurisdiction.
Karen?
So I'm going to follow up a little bit on what Greg's saying, but take it from a slightly different perspective, which is this is not a rule that we're writing for all of Oregon. This is a rule that we're writing specifically for the LUBGWMA. And so I think that where we can be geographically specific in as many ways as possible, we should be. So, for example, you use explicitly the Umatilla Indian Reservation. To try to make things clear, do we need to actually call out the depot or other areas as well? Or is this clear enough that it's going to be specific to certain things in the LUB? One, and then two, I think the gist of, or what I take away from Greg's comment is that if there's the depot and under the depot there's a plume of something and it's moving westward and agricultural activity goes in west of that, what can the state do to be working on dealing with that? And if it's put in here that we can't apply our rules there, is there some conversation that would happen? Is there a way to say, you know, in consultation with blah, 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 or is that not necessary? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And these rules aren't necessarily to deal with an existing plume, right? These rules are addressing additional contributions to a plume and are meant to look at it from that perspective, not from managing or monitoring a plume and where it's moving. It's more surface level grower control related rules around BMPs. So I hear you, like we have this plume that's down there that we're concerned about that may be impacting somebody that's west of there. But really, I think when we get into the meat of the rules, we're not looking at those monitoring metrics that would show that plume as something that's impacting a grower potentially. So, yeah, I'm not sure how we could address that component in these rules.
Okay, well, I appreciate the clarification. It's on the record that some concerns were raised, and I think you've dealt with them. So that's the important part.
Caleb?
Would it be possible or productive to include some language, just saying to the extent possible, state agencies shall encourage uniformity in nutrient management practices across the LUBGWMA, including by federal agencies, just to try to lead that direction, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I'm making a note of that. I don't know, Renee, if you have thoughts on that, whether that's, I mean,
It would be great if you could suggest some language, and then we could take a look at it and think about it. I mean, I
Okay.
understand the points that everybody is raising, and I think it's good. You guys are being thoughtful, and I think it'll be helpful if you have language that you'd like to see or scenarios that you're worried about in particular. If you send those on to us, and then that helps me, at least I can sit down and read what you're concerned about and think about it and then have a response. So if you could do that, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Count on it.
Thank you. So I was at subsection 5. These area rules do not constitute a national pollutant discharge elimination system permit or a water pollution control facility permit issued pursuant to the Federal Clean Water Act or 468B050. Compliance with these area rules does not exempt a landowner from the Federal Clean Water Act or state water pollution control laws. Subsection 6. The fact that it is necessary to halt or reduce activities contributing to discharges to maintain compliance with these rules shall not be a defense for violation of these rules. Subsection 7. The requirements in these area rules do not authorize the commission of any act causing injury to property of another or protect the landowner from liabilities under other federal, state, county, or local laws. Subsection 8. These area rules do not apply to conditions resulting from unusual weather events or other exceptional circumstances beyond the reasonable control of the landowner. An example of reasonable control of the landowner means that technically sound and economically feasible measures are available to address conditions described in these rules.
yeah, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have a question about, I really like the number 8. I think because that probably will be happening. We will have events where we will be irrigating one day and the day after we can have a big storm. It's not common in the region, but it can happen. So I wonder, and maybe it is coming later, but who will be responsible for keeping records of those events or those kind of climatic unusual times? It will be the same owner of the land that will be recording that thing and using it later to explain something that can be found, or some of the state agencies will be keeping track of that thing and maybe doing once a year a statistical analysis of what was the climate during that season.
So those are really good points, Dr. Bonilla. Thank you. I think that there's some flexibility here about how this rule can be used, and we didn't want to get too prescriptive about how it could be used. We're putting everyone on notice that this is, we recognize that farming is incredibly unpredictable. And so I think that, if I were a farmer, I would definitely want to keep track of those instances where, there were events beyond my reasonable control that may have led to a discharge. And I would definitely want to keep a record of that, but we're not going to prescribe that because, maybe this could happen to somebody who doesn't keep a record of it. And by merit of not keeping a record of it, we don't want them to be excluded from using this rule.
Good.
Just to follow up quickly to Renee's answer, in our agricultural water quality management area rules, we typically have a statement like this as well. And most of the time, what we consider to be an unusual weather event is a 25-year, 24-hour event. And so we'll take that into account, see if that did occur or not. And then the other thing you have to take into account is, did they have practices or management in place that would have prevented conditions under that type of event? So you have to kind of see what they're actually doing in addition. So,
And I will note, when we get down to the section later, the land application rates and restrictions, there is a component in there about record keeping around the weather conditions and soil moisture at the time of application. So like that would be the perfect spot where at least, you know, I documented that at the time I made the application, the weather was X, like it wasn't anticipated. And then if there wasn't a particular event, also could be documented, but.
Excellent. Thank you.
Are we ready to move on? Okay, 3 definitions. For the purposes of these rules, unless the context requires otherwise. Number 1, agricultural activities means engaging in any generally accepted, reasonable, and prudent method of growing or harvesting agricultural crops and commodities. Number 2, agronomic application rate or agronomic rate means the rate of synthetic fertilizers, compost, or manure required to achieve estimated crop yield with minimal leaching of nitrate. Number 3, agricultural lands means lands that may be used for agricultural activities. And I crossed out the are permitted to be because when I was reading it, I thought, well, that's kind of weird. Maybe it sounds like you have to have a permit to use the land. Anyway, I just thought that word was kind of unnecessarily confusing, so I just crossed it out and put may. I see we have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Greg.
So would agriculture activities also include grazing?
Yes.
So the animals be considered the agricultural crop or commodity? Is that how broadly?
Correct.
Is that how you, okay. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah.
Justin?
For the language that may be used, I mean, should it be that are being used? Because if I have 10 acres of land that I'm not doing anything with, I now have to come up with a nutrient management plan. That doesn't seem, if the requirement of the rules is that those requirements are tied to the definition of agricultural lands, just want to be clear that these rules apply to lands that are actively being used for agriculture, not may be used for agriculture.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. Thank you for your comment. Subsection 4, agricultural operation means A, all agricultural land, whether or not contiguous, that is under the effective control of a landowner engaged in any commercial activity relating to the growing or harvesting of agricultural crops or the production of agricultural commodities. B, synonym for a farm. And then I added this reference as defined in ORS 3930 sub 1, and I'm referring to what's colloquially known as the Right to Farm Act. And that statute has a definition of a farm. So I wanted this to be consistent with that statute. Sorry, excuse me. Subsection 5, area plan or agricultural water quality management area plan means a plan for the prevention and control of water pollution from agricultural activities and soil erosion in a management area that has been designated under ORS 568909. Area rules are administrative rules adopted by the Oregon Department of Agriculture in consultation with the Oregon Board of Agriculture and the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality for the implementation of the area plans referenced in these rules. Subsection 7, certifier means a qualified irrigation and nitrogen management plan specialist is provided in OAR 603 XXX XXX 14. And just to give you guys a heads up, I think in the next draft, I'm going to, instead of referring to this other section for certifier, I'm just going to put the relevant pieces of 14 in here so that you don't have to be flipping pages, and it's a lot more specific. So I apologize for not getting to that before this meeting. But just a heads up that in the next draft, you'll see that this definition is amended to refer specifically to those attributes that a certifier is required to have. Subsection 8, compost has the meaning given in ORS 633-311 sub 5. That's the Fertilizers and Soil Amendment Act. I don't know if you want me to pull that up for you, or if you can pull that off the web and take a look at it. But we just wanted to be, again, consistent with the other statutes with regard to referencing terms.
Yep,
And I
thanks.
see we have a question.
Yeah, we have a question. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, so I've got that definition of compost and I'm looking at it. And this may be overly picky, but I want to make sure we address the geographically specific issues that I was trying to talk about before. This says a substance primarily or entirely derived from the decomposition of vegetative or animal organic matter, blah, blah, blah. I want to make sure, because I know folks around the state, but particularly in the LUBGWMA, use biosolids from wastewater treatment plants as soil amendments. And I just want to make sure that compost can embrace that. I would think it could, because it's derived from animal waste, but I just want to kind of highlight that if that's a concern. Maybe one of the ag producers here would have more to say about that than I do, but if that is something that doesn't fall under that compost definition, I want to make sure that we can allow for the fact that it is getting used and is a good thing to use.
Thank you for your comment, Karen. That's very helpful. You know, I was thinking about that last night. I wasn't sure if any of the growers out there do use biosolids. So if we can get some feedback on that point, that would be really helpful, because I think that you're right that we would need to refer to that in I think it's got a statutory definition. And I would rather call it out specifically rather than lumping it in with compost.
Well, it says Sunny was kind enough to put the definition in there, so you can see what it says in the chat. So you can see what it says and just.
I will say that maybe we need to reference then maybe agricultural amendment, because there is a definition for agricultural amendment which does incorporate biosolids as part of that definition.
That seems like a better way out of it than trying to stack something on top of the compost definition. So, yeah. But I haven't read that, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's in 633.11 or 311.1. So just farther up in that same statute, it defines ag amendment.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Subsection 9, department means the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Subsection 10, director means the director of the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Subsection 11, estimated crop yield means the near maximum or optimum crop yield estimated for each field according to sources such as recommendations by land-grant universities, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, commodity groups, or according to site-specific knowledge based on previous experience. Subsection 12, fertilizer has the meaning given in ORS 633-311 sub 12. Again, that's the fertilizer statute. Section 13, field means an area of land that is used for agricultural activities and enclosed or otherwise marked by a physical, topographical, or other boundary. Subsection 14, groundwater or groundwater of the state means water within the LUBGWMA that is in a saturated zone or stratum beneath the surface or land or below a surface water body. Do we have a question?
Yeah, Danny.
Hi, I wanted to go back to the definition of field and reading through the rest of the rules. To me, it reads as though you intend for field to mean a management unit, which isn't really clear here if we're talking about something bordered by a topographical or other boundary, maybe like a lot boundary of some sort. And this is an issue that we're running into with a lot of the Endangered Species Act stuff that EPA is coming out with. Their definition of a field is very confusing. And I want to make sure that that's clear to folks what is actually intended by field here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that I think that one thing that you might want to think about is the RAC, which would be really helpful for us, is whether or not we should also have a definition for management unit and allow growers to manage or to apply these rules either using a field or a management unit. And I think it would be good to hear feedback from you guys on that point.
I'm only hearing you right now, actually.
Jeff?
Yeah, I was gonna bring up, I didn't see management unit, and that's very different than a field. And you talk a lot about sampling later, and I think you're talking about sampling on a field basis. If there was some latitude to do it on a management basis, that would be, I think, helpful for implementation.
Yeah, I agree with you because otherwise there would be a lot of redundant samples, right? So,
Well, and how farmers define a field is different, right?
mhm.
So even though you might have an irrigation system irrigating 100 acres, that could be multiple crops. So that would be multiple fields, which would get convoluted quickly.
Sure, that's a good point. Thank you.
Greg?
Just agreeing what Jeff said. So there's on the record.
Thank you.
Is that everyone or okay?
Yep.
There's a comment from Karen in the chat. Please flag the exceptions regarding oh, okay. Did we already address that, Karen?
No, when I went and looked through what Sunny posted, the first part of it, agricultural amendment, says biosolids can be an agricultural amendment, but when you go down, there are restrictions on what kind of biosolids. So I'm just saying, please go back and look at that as you're thinking about changing the language and consider whether or not that actually gets to the point we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a separate definition for biosolids is my hunch, but I could be wrong.
And there are different classifications from DEQ regarding biosolids and like class A and class whatever. And then there's separate ag amendment regulations that those do or do not have to comply with. So yeah, okay, we'll go look at that.
Yeah, just looking at it and making sure we're getting to where we want to go, whichever route we use. I just don't want to inadvertently include something and then go, oh crap, we didn't want to do that.
Yep, thanks.
I like your pun, Karen. That was a good one.
Okay, you're the only one that noticed. I worked so hard.
Subsection 15. Irrigated agricultural lands or irrigated agriculture means agricultural lands irrigated to produce crops or pasture, and including lands that are planted to commercial crops that are not yet marketable, such as vineyards and tree crops. Irrigated lands includes nurseries. And I'm hearing some feedback, so I don't know. Someone, I can hear some chatting.
I think it might be me.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Sunny.
It's a busy director's office over there.
All right, subsection 16. This is an incredibly complicated march through the statutes, and I apologize for that, but just it's the way the statutes are. Landowner has the meaning given in ORS 568.210 and ORS 568.903, and includes an operator as defined in ORS 568.900 sub 2. The gist of this, if you want, I can march you through the statutes, but I think it would be kind of a waste of time. The gist is that this covers everyone who owns or occupies the land, including folks who are leasing the land. But you can go through this at your leisure, and if you see some concerns, just let me know, but it's pretty much tied to the statute.
And the intention there was to make it clear, because I think we had heard before that while landowner, like, right, if you thought strictly of like who owns the deed to the land, that's not feasible for what these rules require a landowner to do. So we tried to make sure that it was clear that it could be that person, it could be someone who's leasing, operating on it. And so that's why it's encompassing and trying to be broad there about what a landowner is or operator. So
it's also quite circumscribed by statute.
Yeah.
Subsection 17, manure means solids or liquids excreted from an animal. Subsection 18, nitrogen management measures means measures to match fertilizer and nitrogen applications to agronomic demands and includes its determination of the appropriate agronomic application rate to achieve estimated crop yield. Nitrogen management measures include the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship as provided in the NRCS Conservation Practice Standard Nutrient Management Code 590 from 2019. Subsection 19, operator has the meaning given in 568-200 sub 2, again, a statutory definition. Subsection 20, pasture means land that sustains vegetative growth in the normal growing season that is primarily used to grow forage for grazing livestock, where the livestock are not confined in pens or lots, or on a prepared surface and where waste is not managed using a wastewater control facility. So pasture is, something that is not a confined animal feeding operation. Subsection 21, pollution or water pollution has the meaning given in 468B005. 22, saturated soil means soil with all available pore space filled that has reached its maximum retentive capacity. 23, oh, we have a question.
Okay. Jeff.
I've noticed, and I'm raising my hand right now because I think it fits here. You use soil water holding capacity a lot throughout the document. It might be helpful to add that definition and be very clear about that definition for the rest of the document.
Okay. Do you have a particular definition that you want me to look at?
Dr. Bonillo Carlos can probably help you with that. He's the certified scientist, right, Carlos?
Ask Dr. Bonillo.
Yeah, no problem. I will send you one, which is actually a good point because there's 2 or 3 different ways to compute it, and you need to know exactly which one is the one that you are using. So I will help with that.
Thank you.
Or write the language that encompasses the various ways to do it. So we're not prescriptive. But I do think the definition it's used so much it would probably be helpful.
Yep.
Good call.
Thank you. That's helpful.
We had somebody join us, I think by phone. Just wanted to see if it was one of our invited RAC members or if it was a public participant.
It's a public participant.
Okay, great. Hey, welcome. Okay, keep going, Renee. Sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Synthetic fertilizer means fertilizer made from ammonia, nitrogen, phosphate minerals, and other chemicals through human-controlled chemical reactions. Synthetic fertilizers include dry fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, foliar fertilizer, and any other type of fertilizer that has a guaranteed nutrient content. And remember, fertilizer's already defined. So this is just like specifying synthetic fertilizers. 24, waste or wastes has the meaning given in 468B005 with the clarification that waste or wastes includes but is not limited to commercial fertilizers, soil amendments, compost, animal waste, vegetative material, and includes nitrate that enters groundwater by any means.
From
Renee, if you're going to change the compost definition, you'll probably want to make sure that whatever you end up with gets covered here as well.
Noted. Thank you. Water or waters of the state has the meaning given in 468B005. Are we ready to leave definitions? Okay, moving on to prohibited acts in 4. So this first one, I woke up late last night realizing that it's not a good idea to use this word discharge because under the Federal Clean Water Act, the word discharge refers specifically to discharges from point sources. And I didn't want anyone to get confused and think that we were somehow referring, categorizing these rules as governing point sources. So I drafted this language that you see here to address that issue and to make the rule language more consistent with its authorizing statute, which is 468B 025 subsection 1A. And so the language is agricultural activities may not cause pollution to the groundwater of this state. And so again, I think we should delete the language that was previously there and insert this new language. And in your comments, please consider this new language. Subsection 2. Again, I wanted to make sure that the rule language was a little bit more consistent with the statutory language in ORS 468B 025 subsection 1A. So I just edited this saying wastes resulting from agricultural activities may not be placed in a location where such wastes are likely to escape or be carried into groundwater by any means. So when you comment, please consider this amended language.
And this language
Subsection,
is also
sorry.
consistent with the existing area rules for both management areas as well.
Subsection 3, I wanted to delete the word discharge so we aren't confusing this with point source discharges under the Federal Clean Water Act. So it should read, the placing of fertilizers, fumigants, or pesticides into groundwater via backflow through a water supply well is prohibited. The subsection 4, the same thing. The placing of fertilizers, fumigants, or pesticides down a groundwater well casing is prohibited. Subsection 5, a landowner within the LUBGWMA may not violate the provisions of 05, which I'm going to go through next. But are there any questions about prohibited acts? So 05 refers to land application rates and restrictions. So these rules apply to all of the landowners within the LUBGWMA. Subsection 1, a landowner shall employ nitrogen management measures when making land applications of synthetic fertilizers, compost, or manure. And again, we'll have to amend this to include biosolids if that's where we land with that. Subsection 2, before synthetic fertilizers, compost, or manure may be applied, a landowner shall, A, take soil samples consistent with soil sample protocol rule, and take into consideration existing plant available nitrogen levels and estimated crop yields when making an application of fertilizers, compost, or manure. So this section really embodies a lot of the literature that I was reading from OSU, which emphasizes that it's really important that landowners consider how much nitrogen needs to be applied when they're managing their crops. And so we're really focusing on landowner or growers being mindful of the application of nutrients to their crops. And so that's what this is trying to focus everyone's attention on. And we have a question.
Hey, so I was curious, it's a little ambiguous to me the way that this is written. Is this intended that every time you do a fertilizer application that the soil samples need to be taken? And my concern with this is that ultimately we're breaking up fertilizer applications over the course of a season to provide it at the time that the plant needs it. But you could be discouraging that practice by requiring somebody to take a soil sample each time, and that's going to push them back towards potentially condensing fertilizer applications and providing it in one big slug.
That's a really helpful comment. Thank you. Yes, that's the way the rules are written now, and I think your comment is very helpful context. So I'd like to consider that with our team.
Danny, do you have, so, I mean, the reason it was kind of drafted this way, right, was to say like, yes, as growers are making those in-season applications, knowing information to know how much in that particular application is needed based off of what's existing in the soil and the plant characteristics. So do you have suggested language about how to encourage, not only like providing it when the plant actually needs it throughout the growing season, but a way to inform that decision about what it is, not just taking the 100 pounds of N and dividing by 4, because you're going to do 4 applications over the season, but more targeted. Or maybe if you have thoughts around that, I'd be interested to hear, or others.
Yeah, I don't have anything off the top of my head because I was a little unsure if even that was what was meant to be intended. Yeah, I can definitely work on that though.
Sure.
Jeff?
All staff meeting.
You could probably say something about taking into consideration plant uptake at the time of fertilization or something like that, right? Or anticipated plant uptake.
Paul?
Thank you, Paul Poister with Nutrien. I think some of this, and I'll give a little more thought myself also, but where you reference the NRCS 590 standard captures some of these things I think that we're grappling with right now, but I'll give some more thought to that.
Okay.
But that reference really is helpful, I think.
Thank you. That's really helpful, you guys. Appreciate it. Should we move on to subsection 3? Subsection 3, a landowner shall document and upon request by the department make available for inspection the following for each field to which synthetic fertilizers, compost, or manure are applied. A, the dates and locations of all nitrogen applications. B, the weather conditions and soil moisture at the time of application. And C, the agronomic application rate used.
Jeff?
One
Oh, sorry,
ODA
Jeff.
is pointed right at you, and ODA.
Sorry, yeah, I wanted to clarify. So the current way that this is written is you pull a soil sample before every nitrogen application?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, we're okay. Yeah, that will have a great impact because that does not happen on a lot of crops. The in-season sampling does not happen on most crops, I would say, in the LUBGWMA.
Yeah,
So
and I
that
think
would
that, I'm sorry, that comment would be really helpful. And if you could suggest a methodology for determining like how growers determine how much they need to apply during the growing season. I don't know if you do petiole sampling or what you do, but if you could provide suggestions on some alternatives, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Caleb.
Sorry, couldn't find my microphone button. On the documentation piece, number 3 here, is there a standard for what like the method of documentation and making available? Is there like, are you envisioning, an electronic format or a written form? Like, I wouldn't want people to just have like a file cabinet full of, scribbled notes, things like that.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
some
a really
clarification there.
fantastic point that you're making. I'm glad you pointed that out. So kind of as a background context, I think that the ODA is envisioning creating worksheets to help with the facilitation and implementation of these rules. And that's why the rules are kind of tedious, is that they have to describe everything that goes into the worksheet, because otherwise the worksheet would be like an unlawful rulemaking. So I think that ODA is anticipating creating worksheets that it can post somewhere that folks can fill out. And so there's a structure to their record keeping. But the worksheets are going to have to contain the elements that are in the rules. Does that help?
The other thing I would add to Renee's comment is in other programs where we have required record keeping, say like the pesticides program, where licensed applicators, to, depending on your classification and requirements, are required to keep pesticide application records with very specific elements. We don't mandate a form for those folks, recognizing that that may not fit someone's business model. There's people that use electronic, systems to track all and keep all of their records versus somebody who wants to keep it on a paper PDF or something like that. And so we don't mandate a form, typically speaking, for records, but to Renee's point, like we can offer templates that says like, hey, if you use this, you're meeting all the required elements. It's very clear. But generally speaking, we stay a little bit away from like mandating a specific form for records in other programs as well.
That makes sense. That's helpful. I'm just in the back of my head, I'm wondering like how do we make this as simple and easy for especially like the small scale growers to comply with without, running into the problem of, well, I've just got this drawer full of papers.
Yep, exactly. We do want to make, this as easily implementable for folks as possible, for sure. Let's go to Brad.
Hi, I just had a question on the soil sample protocol rule. Do you guys have a specific one named yet, or is that still subject to determine, I guess?
No, we actually have drafted one. I'm sure it could use some editing. It's at 15. It's on page, it's kind of back. Shoots, for some reason I don't have page numbers on the draft I'm looking at. But it's how all of the rules have kind of like an
XX
number?
and then a number. Yeah.
It's in 15.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see it.
Yeah, no problem.
Carlos.
Thank you. I think it would be convenient. I don't want to make it more complicated. Actually, I want to make it easy to put in practice. I think we need to come up with a more precise description about what the field is. Because 2 pages ago, we were talking about a kind of physical area. So, right, which was a physical, topographical, or other boundaries. But here, I have the feeling that we are talking about a combination of plant, soil, and management area.
Yeah.
So probably we'll have to, and I think the second one, it will be the one that we will be trying to address. So we can use a different name. I think anything that is more convenient to be clear, that it's not just people don't get the understanding that field is a farm necessarily, which is something that is surrounded by a fence. Everything that is happening inside is homogeneous, but in this case, it is actually not, because you can have a different crop, different soil, different management, and also if you want to separate it or not, you can keep the irrigation as one of the managements, or you can put it as a fourth factor. But I think it would be convenient to maybe clarify what is the meaning of that, the domain where we are acting.
Yeah, I know, I agree. And management units a lot easier to define because there are a lot of technical articles that address those. But if you guys also, for the smaller operations where it might just be at the field level, if you folks have some suggested language for defining field, I am all ears, because it's really hard. It's really hard to define it, and I think we could definitely use your insights, the Rules Advisory Committee, to help us with that.
Yeah, that is the tension, right? Like the larger operations versus like a small landowner that is subject, because this is everyone, regardless of size in the LUB, would fall under these. So yeah, if there are suggestions about how to make that really plain language and clear for someone who is looking at this and what they need to do, yep, we're open to that for sure.
We have another hand. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the first thing I was going to comment on was that this section is littered with the word field, but we already addressed that. My second comment was I was curious about how you're intending folks to have to measure and record soil moisture.
So we didn't want to be prescriptive again because there's so many different ways to measure soil moisture. So we don't intend to prescribe how you measure that. Does that answer your question?
Because you could use, right, the ribbon test, you could use so a probe, like there's lots of different ways in terms of recording and looking at that before you make an application. And I think the point of the record keeping requirement is that a grower would consider the current soil moisture before making an application or applying irrigation. So like, what are they taking into consideration and trying to be as really leave it into the hands of the grower about how they accomplish that.
Yeah, I guess I was curious whether soil moisture by feel would be acceptable, or if folks are expected to have to invest in equipment to get a more accurate soil moisture measurement reading.
No, I think we're envisioning that soil moisture by feel would be an acceptable measure of soil moisture.
Okay, subsection 4. A landowner shall prevent the downward movement of nitrate in the soil by managing irrigation water so that the amount of water applied from the combination of precipitation and irrigation does not exceed the water holding capacity of the soil beyond the crop root depth.
Can we pause just for a second? Jeff, did you have a comment on that last soil moisture component?
Yeah, sorry. This is actually on F from the previous section. Annual crop planting and application within 30 days of planting. There probably needs to be some way to, like, if you want a cover crop to prevent your wind from your soil from blowing away over the winter, a lot of times they'll put nitrogen down to get that cover crop a nice jump so that you can prevent soil loss. But that's long before 30 days before planting. You're doing that a lot of times the fall before. And so there needs to be, I think, that 30 days of planting, I think, is a pretty hard line that you'll run into trouble with.
So I think to clarify, the 30 days of, so if you're planting a cover crop, that is planting. So that is a
That does
crop.
count, even though that's not a annual crop or a harvested crop, that counts as a crop.
Correct. Yeah. So if we need to provide clarification there that would include cover crops, we can consider that.
Yeah, it might be useful because it wasn't plain to me that cover crop was included in that.
I mean, the point of all of that is to make sure that you have something that is utilizing the nutrients, right? Whether that's a cover crop or something you're going to harvest for economic value, it's different. There's also a comment. Oops. Karen just saying I like the idea of including cover crop. Thanks, Karen.
Okay, subsection 5. A landowner may not apply synthetic fertilizers, compost, or manure in a manner that causes direct, indirect, or precipitation-related discharge to groundwater. Subsection 6. A landowner...
Renee, you probably want to change discharge there.
I'll take a look at that, Sunny.
Yeah.
I think this is
Thank
like,
you.
I'm not going to say this over and over again because it's tedious. I'll just say it this last time. This will be another place where you want to look at whether or not you want to put biosolids in there.
Right. I think that that's a given for this whole, so we don't have to raise it over and over again.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that. Thank you. So I was at 6. A landowner may not apply synthetic fertilizers, compost, or manure to fields with a frozen surface crust 2 inches or deeper, or if the soil is at or below 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. B, to fields that are snow covered. C, to fields with soils that are or will become saturated with forecasted precipitation prior to infiltration or incorporation. D, if the water table is within 12 inches or less to the surface. E, if precipitation is forecasted in the next 24 hours for the field location and it is likely that application will result in a prohibited act. F, to fields that are bare unless the landowner is preparing the bare fields for the current year's annual crop planting and the application is within 30 days of planting.
Greg and then Danny.
So I mean, C and E are kind of forecast precipitation prior to importation or incorporation. I mean, that's a pretty broad term. I mean, forecasted within how long of a time?
In the next 24.
So which is addressed in E. I guess I'm looking at C and E. The two together. And then in the same context. So for instance, like compost, for instance, a lot of farms, you physically can't get all the compost applied within 30 days of planting. Sometimes it's cover crops. Sometimes you actually, if it's compost or if it's dried manure, 30 days of planting can actually be in violation of National Organic Program standards. So that could actually conflict with the federal law, depending on your harvest time for your crop. And certain fertilizers like compost, dried manure, those kind of things, I mean, those are different than a synthetic fertilizer. The availability, how quick they break down, especially in the wintertime, they're not even going to be available. There's a lot of like TKN, for instance, even port water. EPA has shown that under 42 degrees, I mean, the length before it even breaks down to something that's leachable. That could be, and then there's also take into consideration urease inhibitors or slow release nitrogen fertilizers that are encapsulated. We need to somehow take that into effect so that, because 30 days pre-plant, whether it's a cover crop or potato fields or what have you, sometimes that 30-day window is just not possible.
Thank
and
you.
Then the forecasting precipitation, I mean, I know if I put fertilizer, potentially could put fertilizer on a field, but even if it's got a cover crop on it or going to have a cover crop on it to just in point C, there is a possibility in that field could get, it's going to get forecast precipitation for sure, and it could get, if a field's already planted and you are, let's say with a cover crop and you're putting a dry spread over the top of it, or a fall planted crop and you're putting a dry spread over the top of it, sometimes you actually use water to incorporate that, or you rely on the precipitation to incorporate that. So how do we address that in these rules?
Well, if you have some tweaks, that would be helpful if you want to provide some possible edits to the language. I think the bottom line is that the growers have to be mindful that they may not apply fertilizers in a manner or to soil conditions that are so saturated or wet that it's going to result in leaching beyond the root zone, because that's what we're trying to prevent.
Yeah, and I think that's what E is, and C is trying to get at. So if you're using the forecasted precipitation to incorporate your application, that's fine. But if it results in the prohibitive act of, discharges of fertilizer to groundwater, then that would be, in violation of the prohibited act. So it's more about the quantity of forecasted rainfall, not that you can't make an application prior to any forecasted rainfall. But if there's again, language that you think can help clarify that or gets at what we're trying to achieve, maybe with some different language, happy to consider it.
Okay.
This is
Danny, did you still have a question?
No, Greg actually hit on what I was going to bring up, so I didn't have to.
Perfect. All right, Karen.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to follow up on Greg's comment and other comments that people have or will make around some of these issues that really drill down on management techniques, and wonder if it's worth gathering a portfolio of BMPs that actually justify the kind of approach that Greg's talking about, so people have something to point at when they make those kinds of decisions. And that might not be, probably not included in the language here, but as you develop your templates and tools, putting something like that together so it's very clear how people can think their way through what decisions they're making based on the goals of their cropping system, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Y-
yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense.
And I think
I-
NRCS code 590 are really, that's kind of a nice compendium of best management practices.
Mhm. And additionally, so the ag water quality program's working on trying to identify current practices and best management practices in the region. I think the fertilizer program funded a study that Shalini is working on to gather information from growers and kind of help inform just what you're talking about, Karen. So yeah, very good point. Justin.
Yeah, just following up on Greg and Karen, both good points, and definitely yes, the language in C, I think needs to be more specific if it's going to remain included. But this language and these requirements are important, especially depending on how liability to third party lawsuits works under these rules. And just for clarity, and this isn't a question I don't know the answer to. Has ODA developed ag water quality rules for groundwater anywhere else in the state?
No, this is the first one.
Okay. And so, yeah, just making sure that we're not being overly prescriptive with prohibitive acts is important. But, we also understand that there's probably some general thresholds that, you don't want to go past, and you don't want to see those in nutrient management plans, but just to tread lightly and be very precise, because this is, a pretty big deal.
Yep.
And clearly y'all have given a lot of thought, and so I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments on this section? I mean, it is, to Justin's point, it is a very important section in the rules, both this one and the prior one around prohibited acts. So really interested in getting this correct. So if we want to take more time here, it's great. All right.
Okay,
We're
moving
on
on.
the home stretch. We have 10 minutes left. So if we don't fully get through animal pasturing, that's totally fine. We can put it at the top of the next RAC meeting. But yeah, go ahead, Renee.
So just to let folks know that these rules are based on the literature, again, from OSU that's available to you. If you go to that reference document that we gave you, there's a link to all of the articles that were used to create these rules. And these rules basically incorporate the main points and management suggestions provided by OSU. Subsection 1, a
Renee, I'm
landowner.
not sure we gave them the reference document.
Yeah, I think we did.
Did we?
Sunny, didn't we
Sunny?
give it?
We did for the first RAC. We sent them a
Oh, okay,
link,
great.
a
Sorry.
document with all the links.
Yeah, it's got
And-
hot
I was
links.
just-
And for
Okay,
anyone
sorry.
who can't find it, it's available on our rulemaking webpage, and I'll put the link in the chat for that as well.
Okay, thanks for correcting me. I didn't see it in what we provided for this one, so thanks. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Sunny. No problem. Subsection 1, a landowner grazing livestock or pasture within a LUBGWMA shall rotate livestock and limit livestock numbers to prevent bare ground and promote and maintain adequate vegetative cover. Subsection A, in determining an appropriate stocking rate for livestock grazing on pasture, a landowner shall match livestock requirements with the available forage and frequently monitor forage growth and adjust the stocking rate and grazing period to prevent runoff or overgrazing. Subsection 2, when animals are concentrated to a distinct heavy use area during the rainy season, when the soil is prone to compaction, or when inadequate forage growth would result in overgrazing, a landowner shall remove manure and waste feed from these areas and maintain grassy buffer strips around the area. Subsection 3, a landowner applying synthetic fertilizer, compost, or manure to irrigated pastures shall conduct nutrient management in a manner that prevents the overapplication of nitrogen and reduces the likelihood of nitrate leaching to groundwater.
And we got some questions. Jeff and then Danny.
Yeah, I guess number two, the maintaining grassy buffer strips around the area, that sounds like a surface water kind of thing rather than a groundwater. I guess if you could maybe explain some of your thinking behind that.
I think the thinking is that much like it provides kind of a little strip of plants that are taking up nutrients such as excess nitrate, it applies just as much to groundwater as surface water, because if it's not getting absorbed by plant materials, it's most likely going to be loading the soil. So that was the thinking behind it.
Danny.
I had the same concern. The grassy buffer strips really sound like something that would be used for surface water runoff. Nitrate is going to move vertically through the soil profile. And then on top of that, it's a little bit vague if the buffer strips are supposed to be downslope, or how wide these buffer strips are that you're envisioning, if it is supposed to be a perennial vegetative feature which requires irrigation, or exactly, it's very vague what these grassy buffer strips are intended to be and what their purpose is for a groundwater situation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously nitrates do move down, but if there's nutrients from surface runoff that's also carried laterally in a surface runoff that eventually then would travel downward. So they do move laterally in a rainstorm or a event like that. So that is all, again, why we were considering the buffer strips in that case related to groundwater. Point taken, certainly on the vague component of like how wide, like are these perennial, like what are you actually requiring of me?
It sounds like then in that case, what you're wanting is something that's downslope, as opposed to all the way around. If your concern here then is surface water movement in rain events.
Yeah.
I think it kind of depends on the topographical configuration of the field, but I think that we should definitely, if you have some suggested tweaks to the language, that would be great to see. Or just post your questions and we'll try to address them with clarification.
And I am capturing those questions and notes, so.
Caleb.
Caleb.
Wondering if it might be helpful to define the rainy season here. I know in like some point source permits, the non-growing season is defined. We do have a pretty small geographical area, generally speaking, so it might be possible. I'm just wondering what the thinking was on that and if that might be helpful.
Okay.
Bob?
Yeah, thank you. With regard to number one, I'm concerned that it's not a standard that's very measurable. So there's, no, it doesn't give you a number of animals per acre or something like that. So I think that might be difficult to, I guess, enforce.
Okay.
Carlos? Carlos? They're not. They still work.
Yeah, Carlos, go ahead.
There are instances where.
Yeah, I agree with the previous comments on number two. I think maybe if we add something like, instead of saying around the area, maybe where you have any chances of runoff or concentrated flow, because actually I presume that is the main purpose of that idea, trying to filter anything that is coming from that field. So maybe it's not necessary to do something uphill. And I think Danny mentioned that thing too. And but it would be easy to identify where the water is running. And in those areas, we should recommend something like a filter.
Thank you, Carlos. Greg?
Just going to confirm, I agree with everything Danny said, and actually what Carlos just mentioned, and I would also add that could it say vegetative buffer and not grassy, because there are other crops besides grass crops that could be used as buffers.
Thanks, Greg. Bob?
Yes.
Yeah, I had one other thought. We'll want to be careful that this language doesn't conflict with what some of the local counties have in terms of animal density standards. Because my understanding is these rules will apply to all of the LUBGWMA, even small areas in the unincorporated parts of the county that may not be zoned exclusive farm use. So they might be rural residential where people are keeping animals. And in those zones, both counties, I believe, have animal density standards.
So my understanding is that counties can have more restrictive ordinances than the state rules. And I guess I would be hesitant if the county's rural residential standards for stocking density was more restrictive than what we would want to do outside of that zone. So I don't know what your standards are, Bob, but like that would be my concern about how to like make sure that we're not being overly restrictive.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I agree. I would want to make sure, I guess, that the state rule isn't less or isn't more restrictive than what the county has.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe Renee, I don't know what your thoughts are on calling attention to that this doesn't a language that makes sure that states that this doesn't conflict or supersede a county's ability to create a stocking density in another area.
Well, it seems like the language is intended to allow the land manager, to exercise discretion as to stocking rates to make sure that there's not bare ground or there's the ability to promote and maintain vegetative cover, because again, the intent of the rules is to prevent discharge of nitrate below the root zone, and one of the ways to address that is by making sure you don't have, large swaths of bare ground that are getting loaded with manure, for example. And so I think the intent of the articles that I read was, this is how you manage a healthy pasture to prevent those types of things. And I think that, we're intentionally not prescriptive as to animal numbers because of that, because we're trying to leave as much discretion to the landowner as possible to gauge their particular practices with the land and the animals that they're managing. But the intent and the goal is to promote and maintain adequate vegetative cover and prevent bare ground. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Renee. I guess one thing that might be helpful, I don't know if you can do this in rules, but I think Karen brought up earlier referencing like BMPs or something like that, because I think to, large commercial ranching operations, they're going to understand these best management practices already. But the smaller folks that may not even be aware that there's these rules in place probably aren't. And so having some resources to what is an appropriate stocking rate for livestock might be helpful.
Do you have some suggestions along those lines?
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with it to that I know of any good resources out there, but I'm sure there are. I don't. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
And then we'll take a question from Jeff, and then we'll wrap it up and save the rest of the discussion for the next meeting.
Yeah, my comment is on number 2 again. Just kind of echoing what everyone else said. It almost sounds too descriptive because it's talking about compacted soils from overgrazing. Well, if it's a compacted soil and you have water sitting on the top, the reason water's on top is because you're not having lateral movement of nitrate. So then we're creating buffer strips. Again, this just sounds less like a groundwater problem and more like a surface water. And so I don't know. I think the language in number 2 needs to change quite a bit.
And again, if you have specific, I mean, I hope folks understand what we're trying to get at with 2 and ensuring that like folks are, you know, have that sacrifice area in the winter and are managing that appropriately and keeping any impacts from that resulting in groundwater impacts. So please, you know, share language or tweaks. And to that point, Sunny, do we want folks to send that to the rulemaking email? Is that the easiest?
Sure, absolutely. I'll put that in the chat. It's just rulemaking at ODA .state. No, I'll put it in there. We changed our email and all of a sudden I can't remember.
Okay, I just put it in there.
Thank you. Perfect. We our next meeting is scheduled for May 22nd at 10:30. So we will, again, as Isaac mentioned, send you some updates to the rules that we talked about today. I will be posting a copy of the recording of today's meeting on our rulemaking webpage. So if it's helpful for you to go back and listen to that, or you have folks that you want to share that with, so that, again, members of the community funnel any comments through you to us here at ODA. That will be available by the end of the week, hopefully by the end of today. But with that, unless Isaac or Renee have additional comments, I will close out the meeting.
30 minutes. We're stuck.
Yeah, no, thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. Really great engagement. So thank you. We'll talk at the next meeting.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.